The chapter daily routine. First illustration, the alarm clock goes off.
Le réveil sonne.
Second illustration, to wake up.
Se réveiller.
Third illustration, to get up.
Se lever.
Fourth illustration, to turn on the light.
Allumer la lumière.
Fifth illustration, to get dressed.
S'habiller.
Sixth illustration, to open a door.
Ouvrir une porte.
Seventh illustration, to turn on a faucet.
Ouvrir un robinet.
Eighth illustration, to wash a face and hands.
Se laver le visage et les mains.
Ninth illustration, to look in a mirror.
Se regarder dans un miroir.
A quick overview. 10th illustration, to brush teeth. 11th illustration, to turn off a faucet. 12th illustration, to dry hands / a face with the towel. 13th illustration, to close a door. 14th illustration, to do exercises. 15th illustration, to take a shower. 16th illustration, to shave. 17th illustration, to shampoo hair. 18th illustration, to soap a body. 19th illustration, to dry hair. 20th illustration, to wipe feet on the rug. 21st illustration, to make the bed. 22nd illustration, to have breakfast. 23rd illustration, to put on shoes. 24th illustration, to lock a door. 25th illustration, to drop the kid off at school. 26th illustration, to go to work. 27th illustration, to work on the computer. 28th illustration, to sit at the school desk. 29th illustration, to play in the sandbox. 30th illustration, to have lunch. 31st illustration, to pick up the kids from school. 32nd illustration, to come home. 33rd illustration, to unlock a door. 34th illustration, to take off shoes. 35th illustration, to take off clothes. 36th illustration, to have dinner. 37th illustration, to sit in an armchair. 38th illustration, to do homework. 39th illustration, to play a game. 40th illustration, to watch TV. 41st illustration, to change the TV channel. 42nd illustration, to turn up the volume. 43rd illustration, to turn down the volume. 44th illustration, to iron a shirt. 45th illustration, to apply a face cream on a face. 46th illustration, to set an alarm. 47th illustration, to go to bed. 48th illustration, to dream a dream. The chapter vehicle. First illustration, to open a car door.
Ouvrir une portière de voiture.
Second illustration, to get in a car.
Monter dans une voiture.
Third illustration, to insert the key into the ignition.
Insérer la clé dans le contacteur d'allumage.
Fourth illustration, to start the car.
Démarrer une voiture.
Fifth illustration, to warm up a car.
Faire chauffer la voiture.
Sixth illustration, to get behind the wheel.
Prendre le volant.
Seventh illustration, to close a car door.
Fermer une portière de voiture.
Eighth illustration, to fasten the seat belt.
Attacher la ceinture de sécurité.
Ninth illustration, to press the brake, clutch, gas pedal.
Appuyer sur la pédale de frein, d'embrayage, d'accélérateur.
A quick overview. 10th illustration, to move the shifter into first gear. 11th illustration, to release the clutch pedal. 12th illustration, to back up a car. 13th illustration, to drive someone, to, somewhere. 14th illustration, to tow a car. 15th illustration, to turn on headlights. 16th illustration, to turn on the high beam headlights. 17th illustration, to change gears. 18th illustration, to use turn signals. 19th illustration, to turn right. 20th illustration, to overtake a car. 21st illustration, to change lanes. 22nd illustration, to stop at the traffic lights. 23rd illustration, to take a detour. 24th illustration, to fill up the tank. 25th illustration, to make a U-turn. 26th illustration, to wait at the bus stop. 27th illustration, to get on the bus. 28th illustration, to take a taxi. 29th illustration, to have a car accident. 30th illustration to hit a dog. 31st illustration an overturned car. 32nd illustration to park a car. 33rd illustration to get stuck in traffic. 34th illustration to take for a spin. 35th illustration to put on the emergency brake. 36th illustration to open the window, the trunk, the hood. 37th illustration to close the trunk. 38th illustration to check the engine oil level. 39th illustration to change a tire, wheel. 40th illustration to have a flat tire. 41st illustration to inflate a tire. 42nd illustration to go to a gas station. 43rd illustration to jack up a car. 44th illustration to lower a car jack. 45th illustration to fix a car. 46th illustration to turn off the headlights. 47th illustration to turn on the AC. 48th illustration to jump start a car. 49th illustration to push a car. 50th illustration to fold, unfold side view mirrors. 51st illustration to lose control. 52nd illustration to turn on hazard lights. 53rd illustration to flash the headlights. 54th illustration to honk the horn. 55th illustration to unfasten the seat belt. 56th illustration to brake in a car. 57th illustration to get out of a car. 58th illustration to drive a car into a garage. 59th illustration to turn off the engine. 60th illustration to lock a car. The chapter cleaning and washing. First illustration to dust furniture.
Épousseter les meubles.
Second illustration to vacuum a floor.
Aspirer un plancher.
Third illustration to clean windows.
Nettoyer les vitres.
Fourth illustration to shake out a rug.
Secouer un tapis.
Fifth illustration to beat a rug.
Battre un tapis.
Sixth illustration to sweep a floor.
Balayer un plancher.
Seventh illustration to rearrange furniture.
Réarranger les meubles.
Eighth illustration to wring out a duster.
Tordre un chiffon.
Ninth illustration to lay a carpet on a floor.
Poser un tapis sur un plancher.
A quick overview. 10th illustration to clean a carpet. 11th illustration to wash walls. 12th illustration to clean wallpaper. 13th illustration to take out the trash. 14th illustration to pour water out of a bucket. 15th illustration to take out the carpet. 16th illustration to roll up a carpet. 17th illustration to wash clothes by hand. 18th illustration to wash clothes in a washing machine. 19th illustration to rinse clothes. 20th illustration to put the powder in a washing machine. 21st illustration to shake laundry. 22nd illustration to hang clothes on a clothesline. 23rd illustration to dry dishes with a dish towel. 24th illustration to air a room. 25th illustration to draw curtains. 26th illustration to draw back curtains. 27th illustration to raise a blind. 28th illustration to pull curtains aside. 29th illustration to pull down a blind. 30th illustration to fluff up a pillow. 31st and 32nd illustrations to turn a pillowcase inside out. The chapter cooking. First illustration to pour water into a kettle.
Verser l'eau dans une bouilloire.
Second illustration to light a match.
Allumer une allumette.
Third illustration to put a kettle on a cooker.
Mettre une bouilloire sur une cuisinière.
Fourth illustration to put the tea leaves into a teapot.
Mettre les feuilles de thé dans la théière.
Fifth illustration to spread a tablecloth over a table.
Mettre une nappe sur une table.
Sixth illustration to slice bread.
Couper le pain.
Seventh illustration to clear the table.
Débarrasser la table.
Eighth illustration to cook food.
Faire cuire la nourriture.
Ninth illustration to peel a potato.
Éplucher une pomme de terre.
A quick overview. 10th illustration to slice an onion. 11th illustration to sift flour. 12th illustration to pour water into flour. 13th illustration to uncork a bottle. 14th illustration to sprinkle with salt. 15th illustration to dissolve yeast. 16th illustration to add yeast to flour. 17th illustration to add salt to flour. 18th illustration to knead dough. 19th illustration to let dough rise. 20th illustration to roll out dough. 21st illustration to cut dough. 22nd illustration to shred a cabbage. 23rd illustration to pour water into a saucepan. 24th illustration to fry meat. 25th illustration to stew beef. 26th illustration to boil corn. 27th illustration to salt fish. 28th illustration to put pepper. 29th illustration to seal up dough. 30th illustration to set the table. 31st illustration to sit at the dinner table. 32nd illustration to eat food. 33rd illustration to wash dishes. 34th illustration to seal a jar. 35th illustration to spread butter on bread. 36th illustration to reheat the food. 37th illustration to eat sunflower seeds. 38th illustration to make juice. 39th illustration to clean teeth with a toothpick. The chapter stove. First illustration to remove ash from a stove.
Enlever les cendres d'un poêle.
Second illustration to put kindling.
Mettre le petit bois.
Third illustration to light a match.
Allumer une allumette.
A quick overview. Fourth illustration to light a wood stove. Fifth illustration to crumple up paper. Sixth illustration to add logs. Seventh illustration to place firewood. Eighth illustration to clean a chimney. Ninth illustration to poke fire. The chapter devices and communication. First illustration to add minutes to a cell phone.
Recharger un téléphone portable.
Second illustration to pick up the receiver.
Décrocher le récepteur.
Third illustration to hang up the receiver.
Raccrocher le récepteur.
Fourth illustration to dial a number.
Composer un numéro.
Fifth illustration a dropped call.
Un appel interrompu.
Sixth illustration the battery ran out.
La batterie de téléphone portable est déchargée, je n'ai plus de batterie.
Seventh illustration to turn on a cell phone.
Allumer un téléphone portable.
Eighth illustration to turn off a cell phone.
Éteindre un téléphone portable.
Ninth illustration to print a document.
Imprimer un document.
A quick overview. 10th illustration to scan a book. 11th illustration to send a text message. 12th illustration to receive a text message. 13th illustration to drop a cell phone. 14th illustration to put ads. 15th illustration to plug a computer. 16th illustration to unplug the TV. 17th illustration to screw in a light bulb. 18th illustration to unscrew a light bulb from the socket. 19th illustration to charge a cell phone. 20th illustration to record a video. 21st illustration to take a picture. 22nd illustration to exchange currency. 23rd illustration to talk via Skype. 24th illustration to remove the SIM card. 25th illustration to insert the SIM card. 26th illustration to remove a battery from a cell phone. 27th illustration to insert a battery into a notebook. 28th illustration to insert a disk into drive. 29th illustration to eject a disk from drive. 30th illustration to read electricity, gas, water meter. 31st illustration to type on a keyboard. 32nd illustration to restart a cell phone. 33rd illustration a missed call. The chapter housekeeping. First illustration to thread a needle.
Enfiler une aiguille.
Second illustration to cut with scissors.
Couper avec des ciseaux.
Third illustration to spin wool.
Filer la laine.
Fourth illustration to knit socks.
Tricoter des chaussettes.
Fifth illustration to comb wool.
Peigner la laine.
Sixth illustration to hammer a nail.
Enfoncer un clou.
Seventh illustration to chop wood.
Couper du bois.
Eighth illustration to cut logs.
Scier du bois.
9th illustration to fell a tree.
Abattre un arbre.
A quick overview. 10th illustration to split firewood. 11th illustration to plane wood. 12th illustration to sharpen the knife. 13th illustration to put a handle in an axe head. 14th illustration to remove a nail. 15th illustration to weld a metal. 16th illustration to plow a field. 17th illustration to dig a hole. 18th illustration to sweep a street. 19th illustration to mow grass. 20th illustration to unstitch the skirt. 21st illustration to milk a cow. 22nd illustration to water livestock. 23rd illustration to clean out a barn. 24th illustration to pasture graze cattle. 25th illustration to ride a horse. 26th illustration to harness a horse. 27th illustration to saddle a horse. 28th illustration to plant a vegetable garden. 29th illustration to water a vegetable garden. 30th illustration to remove weeds. 31st illustration to loosen the soil. 32nd illustration to darn socks. 33rd illustration to sew a dress. 34th illustration to pick vegetables and fruits. 35th illustration to drill metal. 36th illustration to punch holes with a hole puncher. 37th illustration to staple papers. 38th illustration to push a wheelbarrow. 39th illustration to carry sand in a wheelbarrow. 40th illustration to load sand into a wheelbarrow. 41st illustration to unload a wheelbarrow. 42nd illustration to clear snow. 43rd illustration to dig a pit. 44th illustration to fill in a pit. 45th illustration to put water into a bucket. 46th illustration to pour water out of a bucket. 47th illustration to carry buckets of water. 48th illustration to rake leaves. 49th illustration to ted hay. 50th illustration to mow the lawn. 51st illustration to bale hay in the round. The chapter clothes and footwear. First illustration to put on shoes.
Mettre des chaussures, se chausser.
Second illustration to put on a jacket.
Mettre une veste.
Third illustration to roll up sleeves.
Se retrousser les manches.
A quick overview. Sixth illustration to zip up a jacket. Seventh illustration to tie a tie. Eighth illustration to button a shirt. Ninth illustration to unbutton a shirt. 10th illustration to tie shoelaces. 11th illustration to untie shoelaces. 12th illustration to unzip a jacket. The chapter miscellanea. First illustration to go downstairs.
Descendre, l'escalier.
Second illustration to go upstairs.
Monter, l'escalier.
Third illustration to climb over a fence.
Escalader une clôture.
Fourth illustration to jump out of a window.
Sauter par la fenêtre.
Fifth illustration to climb a tree.
Monter dans un arbre.
Sixth illustration to climb down a tree.
Descendre d'un arbre.
A quick overview. Seventh illustration to pack a suitcase. Eighth illustration to hang wallpaper. Ninth illustration to get a mortgage. 10th illustration to put on a watch. 11th illustration to take off a watch. 12th illustration to put an earring into an earlobe. 13th illustration to swaddle a baby. 14th illustration to make a doctor's appointment. 15th illustration to wait one's turn. 16th illustration to withdraw money from ATM. 17th illustration to get fired. 18th illustration to get a loan.